Welcome to Talk Heathen, the show where we take your calls and explore belief with curiosity and courage. I'm Christy Powell, and today I want to begin with something that's been weighing heavy on my mind, not just as a former believer, not just as a therapist, and not just as a Texan, but as a citizen of this complicated country we call home. It's no secret that American identity and Christianity have long been tangled together like roots in dry soil. You can't really dig into one without pulling up clumps of the other. This nation was founded, at least in part, on religious idealism, but let's be honest, it was also founded on stolen land, on the backs of enslaved people, and with a version of Christian faith that comforted the powerful while quieting the oppressed. And those histories aren't parallel, they're intertwined. We've all heard the phrase Christian nation tossed out like a compliment, like a badge of honor. But what does that really mean? What kind of Christianity are we talking about? The gentle, justice-driven Jesus of the Sermon on the Mount, or the more militarized, flag-draped Messiah of Fox News and political rallies? Because the Christianity that so often gets wrapped in red, white, and blue isn't about loving your neighbor. It's about controlling them. It's about enforcing hierarchy, patriarchal, racial, economic, through spiritual authority. It tells us that God anointed this nation, that white forefathers were divinely guided, and that any challenge to this story is rebellion against the sacred. That idea is not just nationalism, that is white Christian nationalism, a belief system that says America belongs to white Christians and must be ruled accordingly. And it's not fringe. It shows up in our laws, in our school boards, and our courtrooms. It showed up in the chants and crosses carried on January 6th, and it shows up every time someone says real Americans while quietly meaning straight, white, conservative Christians. Whatever my issues with Christianity, I am not here to bash Christians. I know there are people of faith doing the hard work of justice and compassion. But if we're going to have honest conversations on this show and challenge ideas that hurt people, we need to call this what it is: a toxic, supremacist ideology hiding behind rhinestone crosses and cross-stitched scripture. This isn't just a theological disagreement, it's a human rights issue. When religion is used to justify control, to silence dissent, to erase queer lives, to marginalize immigrants, or to elevate one race and one worldview above all others, that's not faith, it's oppression. And if your God needs nationalism and racism to stay in power, maybe it's time to rethink who or what you are really worshiping. So let's talk about it. If you've seen this fusion of faith and power up close, I want to hear your story. If you're trying to untangle your own beliefs from the myths you were raised on, let's do that together. Because turns out the truth actually matters, and so do you. So give us a call, because the show is coming right now. Okay, well, welcome everybody. Today is July 6, 2025. I'm your host, Christy Powell, and with me today is Sofia Spina. I want to start by saying that we are already sending love rings to those affected by massive flooding here in the Austin area. 59 confirmed dead and 27 girls from Camp Mystic still unaccounted for at last check. Our thoughts are certainly still with them. If you'd like to be part of the solution, you can visit bit.ly/Austin Flood Fund to contribute to the 501c3 nonprofit Kerr County Flood Relief Fund set up by the Community Foundation of the Texas Hill Country and put your secular humanism to good work. Sofia, how did y'all hold up during this recent weather?
You know, we stayed home. We were under the orders to say, like, don't travel anywhere unless you're leaving an area of evacuation. We are quite close to a river that did swell a lot. We're up a hill. So a lot of our friends and neighbors, you know, are still in at least dicey situations. Yeah, it's just kind of mind boggling to think about how suddenly this changed.
Sure.
Yeah. So it was, you know, for us, I'm extremely thankful that we stayed home with our toddler. And some meltdowns on his part were the worst it really got. But it's a very different kind of storm.
Yeah, no, we fared just fine. We were already planning on kind of holding up for the weekend, not feeling especially patriotic this year and enjoying the extra time at home. But it's definitely been very upsetting watching the news, particularly the news coming out of this small summer camp. And we're definitely sending out our love rings. I want to say again that URL is bit.ly/Austin Flood Fund to contribute to the Kerr County Flood Relief Fund. We really hope that you will put your humanism into action and help us out. All right. Well, with that, I'll remind everybody that this is Talk Heathen, a production of the atheist community of Austin. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization that is dedicated to the promotion of atheism, critical thinking, secular humanism, and the separation of religion and government. We are a live call-in show, and we have open lines, so get your calls in at 512-991-9242 or from your computer at tiny.cc/callth. Sofia, we're going to bring in Richard here in just a moment to do our question of the week segment, but I'm curious to know, who are you excited to talk to today?
I am excited to talk to people, particularly, as you mentioned, it was 4th of July. It's a patriotic holiday, which is complicated for a lot of people. I myself, this might surprise folks, but I have always described myself as a patriotic American. And I think a lot of folks don't like that or find that to be strange to them or don't like the fact that I feel like I deserve to be here too. So I want to talk with people who actually, who maybe want to discuss that a little bit, but
no, we'll dive into it. I'll co-sign that as maybe a vaguely disaffected, middle-aged patriotic American. But I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'm interested to hear from the audience. And with that, let's get to our question of the week segment and bring Richard in.
Yeah, it's time for our question of the week section. I've just realized that I'm repping. I did not do this on purpose.
The merch is just in the rotation. It's part of daily life. That's what we like to see.
Yeah, completely by accident as well. I didn't even realize until I looked down and saw the cup then and thought, oh my, I'm wearing the shirt as well. So it is time for our Talk Heathen to Me segments where we get into the questions of the week. And last week we asked you Jesus' last words, wrong answers only. And here are our top 3 answers. Number 3, no God required. Jesus' last words, don't you know who my dad is? Pretty standard one there, guys, yeah?
My dad can beat up your dad. Unless your dad is the devil, in which case he won't bother. I don't know. I don't get it.
Unless your dad whispering into you in the desert. That's a bit weird, isn't it? Okay, number 2 is Miranda Rensberger. Jesus' last words. Hey, remember at supper last night when I was talking about the bread and wine? I got interrupted before I could tell you all about the yogurt. Wait, why are you stabbing me?
It's a one-act play. I love it.
And number 1 is Chuck Gados. Jesus' last words were, you rotten kids, bring back that shroud. It took it all the way through the centuries.
Yeah.
Stole it and got it into France in the 11th century and hid it all that time in between. Can't believe it. So the prompt for this week, the prompt of the week for next week is wrong answers only. Jesus blank for your sins. Enter your best answer below the video in the comments, and next week we will reveal the top 3 answers. You too. I'm going to go with Christy first. Wrong answers only. Jesus blank for your sins.
Yeah, maybe this is the obvious answer, but Jesus sacrificed himself to appease himself for your so-called sins.
Yeah, that's a good one,
right?
Standard, yeah. Sophia.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking about like a lot of the modern online Christian content I've been seeing lately. So my brain says, Jesus TikToked for your sins.
That is very appropriate. Yeah, I do spend a lot of time over there, and wow, the TikTok crowd is something else. Let me tell you. But yeah, great answers from both of you, and I want to see your answers, you who watch the show. So in the comment section below the video, I had great trouble saying that last week. It's just slipped right off the tongue today. In the comment section below the video, give us your answers. I'm going. Enjoy the show. It's going to be great. I will see you all later.
All right, Richard, we'll see you at the end of the show. For now, let's go ahead and pull up the crew cam so we can thank everybody who helps us to put this show together, who scrambled so quickly to give us access to that relief fund and make sure that everything is up and running despite the weather. Thank you guys so much for all your hard work. All right, Sophia, are you ready to jump into our first call?
Yeah.
Let's do it. Let's talk to Gohan here in Texas. Gohan, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you guys doing?
Doing well.
Doing all right under the circumstances. What's on your mind?
Well, I just want to say I forgot you guys live in Austin, so I'm sorry for what either you guys or anyone you know is going through. So
yeah, very much
you guys
appreciate that. They're on our mind.
Hanging.
Yeah, so what do you got for us today?
Really just come into it. I want to discuss abortion. Christy, I've called, I think, twice before and spoke to you about this.
Yeah, no, I do remember a particularly bizarre hypothetical we got into a while back about a hypothetical woman trapped in a cabin with a police officer and a baby that wasn't her own, and whether she should be obligated to breastfeed that baby. We don't have to rehash all that now, but I do remember speaking to you in some of the interesting places that we got. Yeah, but no, what did you want to ask today? How should we frame all this?
Well, first off, that's a great memory. I had to do my homework last night and actually rewatch the videos where I spoke to you guys before. Otherwise, I would not have remembered it. But you got it like spot on. So great job. But if I could just really quick start, are you guys fans of dad jokes? It does apply to abortion.
It depends on the dad joke.
That is a caveat if I've ever heard one.
All right. I mean, I'm happy to give it a go. I trust your discretions. I've never met you before, but we'll go with it.
No worries. This one definitely is a kind of a pro-life joke, but here it is. Dad and his son are having a conversation. The dad says, "Son, did you know an acorn is a tree?" The son says, "Really?" The dad says, "In a nutshell, yes."
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. So is this an issue of personhood, of that question of what is a fetus? What is an embryo?
Yeah, so that's definitely a question involving personhood. When I have these discussions on abortion, I like to usually skip personhood and just go straight to bodily autonomy, since most pro-abortion people would say even if the fetus is a person, it still doesn't deserve extra rights. So I usually just skip personhood and just go straight to bodily autonomy.
Okay, yeah, so what's the point of contention here?
Okay, so the thing I want to get into is differences between organ donation, like forced organ donation, and difference between that and abortion. For organ donation, if I refuse to give my organ to some child, even if it's my child who's having a heart attack or a bad liver or a bad kidney, if I refuse to give that to them, they don't die because I refuse to give it to them. They die because they have a bad kidney or a bad liver or a bad heart, XYZ. But
sure. And I don't want to be distracting or inflammatory, but I think it's worth pointing out that you have that right to refuse to donate your organs, even posthumously. That even your corpse has the right to not donate those organs.
I agree. Cool. And then so after that, for an abortion, if I have an abortion, I'm just going to say fetus, because not all abortions are going to be maybe you can do an embryo, I don't know. But just going to say fetus for now. If you kill the fetus in an abortion, that fetus dies directly from the abortion. It doesn't die because it had a bad heart. There's a direct act of killing, where in organ donation, there is no direct act of killing. I can't be held accountable for somebody else's death because I didn't help them. An abortion, I can be held accountable because I didn't just not help, I actively killed.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a question of, did you actually pull the lever on that trolley to send it down that track? I get the agency part of all of this. Does that change the calculus for you?
Not entirely. It's like whether you pulled the lever or you hired somebody else to pull the lever so that it hits 5 people instead of 3. Like, if you hired somebody else to do it, you're still held culpable for it. If you pull the lever, you still are held culpable. So in this example, the mother is not pulling the lever. She's hiring somebody else to kill her kid.
Okay. So a couple questions, really. And I find this a very interesting hypothetical, to be honest, because I think that's a worthy question of, like, how many steps away from something can we be before we are not as culpable for it? Because I think that oftentimes within the abortion conversation, there's a discussion of, well, you chose to get pregnant or engage in things that would cause a child. And so I appreciate that you brought up, even if it was your own kid, like, it's kind of a different situation. So I'm curious, because if we live in a world where illegal organ markets exist, right? And it's not something that, we maybe talk about a ton in the US, but it is something that does happen. And so I'm wondering, if you ended up in a situation where you were physically, someone was relying on your body to exist. This is a pretty common analogy with abortion, so I'm just curious as to what your answer is. You're tied to somebody else. You will survive probably, but if you were to say, no, I'm actually not consenting to this operation, I've been kidnapped, I've been hooked up to this other person to keep them alive, and you walked away, that would be a direct action that caused the death of the other person. So what is your take on that one?
Sure. And I don't know how much you guys want me to get into this, because I've called in before about the violinist, but actually,
this is the violinist, right? This is the violinist.
Yeah, just a different formulation of it. Yeah.
So if I refuse, like, if I'm just going to go the violinist route. If I'm tied to the violinist and I walk up and eventually the violinist dies because I didn't stay for the whole 9 months because I have bodily autonomy, what does the violinist?
Could be 20 minutes. It doesn't matter.
I would be directly killing him. But it does, because the violinist would end up dying of, I think it was kidney failure or something. So the violinist isn't dying because I'm not helping them. They're already dying.
Okay, but
failure. They're requiring my help.
Yeah, that's kind of what it, I think that particularly when we're talking about abortion, you're saying they're already dying. Not necessarily. They're not necessarily dying if they get to use your body for the next 9 months. Then they're not dying at all. Then they're going to live.
We're talking about the violinist now,
Yeah.
not a fetus, right?
Yeah, because if we're thinking about, you're saying that they're already dying because of their bad liver. No, they're not. They're using your body. They're not dying. They will be dying if you choose to get up and leave.
So, like, if I'm removed from the situation, what would they, like, on their death certificate, what would it say they died of? Would it say they died of kidney failure, or would they say they died because Gohan didn't help?
I mean, it would probably say kidney failure, but what does an abortion have? Like, what do they list there? They don't list because mom didn't help, So what do they write there?
Oh, it's not because mom didn't help. It's because they actively go in and poison the kid before they take the kid out. So
is that what they write on the death certificate?
Yeah, I don't know if
is
that's
that what
an
they write on the
accurate
death
description
certificate?
of the
I mean,
procedure. But the result, it's not just that the result is the same. It's actually that the mechanism is the same, because the underdeveloped lungs and like the entire system of the fetus is not able to support itself, is going to be reliant in that same way. That's why the metaphor, the thought experiment, works in this way. So we really haven't reinvented the wheel.
Ask a question?
I'm sorry, I missed
that
all of
We
might
it.
didn't
help
catch
y'all's
anything you just
argument.
said.
Sorry, we didn't catch that. Could you repeat that?
Yes. Could I ask a question that might help y'all's argument a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, so I think a question that I've been asked is, what if we could take the fetus out without killing it, like not directly kill it, and let it die? Is that kind of something like you would be? Would that be a question you would want to ask or no?
I
I
mean,
mean, it gets to kind of your initial thrust, which was around sort of the agency of cause of death and whether or not we're responsible for directly pulling the lever or equally culpable for not pulling levers and that kind of thing. I don't know that, I don't know, maybe I'm being too literal and consequentialist about it, but if the end result is the same, I'm hard pressed to see that as like morally distinct.
I think I would also ask at that point.
If it
Sorry, go ahead.
Okay. I would say if that is a route that's taken where you just don't kill the fetus but extract it from the mother, but it's still alive when it comes out, and then you just let it die, I would say that's the same. That's very similar to like not helping the violinist because you didn't kill the violinist and then you just let them die. So I would say that's similar. The only difference is this is your child, and until it can get help from somebody else to take care of it, it requires you.
Okay,
Yeah, you
so
created a
looking
moral
at this-
framework.
Yeah, I think looking at this, a couple things. One, it feels like a distinction without a difference. It feels like it's an argument that can be made that these are, you know, at this point, we're splitting so many hairs. We're living in a science fiction reality when we're talking about having, if we can keep the child alive outside of the womb and then they can slowly die that way or something, like, okay, like maybe that's a thing we could do. It doesn't feel super relevant. So when you brought up your child living without you, being able to live without you. So I feel like let's bring it a little back to reality. I'm sorry, you can see my silly dog over there in the background. When we live in the system that we live in, we have very long organ donation lists. You know, it's your child. You mentioned you need to take care of them till they can live without you is sort of the vibe here. And so supposing you are the only person who can give your child that organ because it's a very long wait list, because you are the only match, the other parent can't do it, and you know they're not going to survive unless you do. Are you killing your child if you choose not to?
I would say no. And also, if you let the child die, the fetus die after you extract them, you're not killing them also.
Okay, then it just seems like life in general doesn't matter in this scenario. It just seems like a hypothetical shrug.
Yeah, I have to
I
point out
would
you've
also
created a
say-
moral framework with this idea of removing the fetus and letting it die of, quote, natural causes, where you are increasing suffering while calling it somehow more moral than the original conceptualization. And that just doesn't resonate for me.
Sorry, I think I paused too long. So I wasn't 100% done. I'm saying that you wouldn't be directly killing the child then, but as the parent, you have a responsibility to your child until someone else can take that responsibility. So you wouldn't be directly involved. You wouldn't be the direct cause of their death, but you still have a duty to your child to not put them in an environment that they can't survive in.
Yeah, we're kind of redefining the argument a little bit and going to this notion that you are obligated to this violinist if that violinist is your genetic child. And so all of these other notions of action sort of shift because we are now making the claim that you do have a moral obligation to your specific children, which I don't, dismiss, but it is a different way of conceiving of what we originally started on. Is that fair?
Can we make the violinist my child that's like 5 years old? That way it kind of fits this situation a little bit better. So in that case, if I put the violinist or my child who is 5 in an environment that, like, let's say I stabbed their kidney or something. So now they need me to be hooked up to them for 9 months to make sure they don't die. If it's my child, I think that's appropriate because my child deserves protection. And someone else
question. So, say you know you have a genetic illness that will compromise your kidney. You have this child anyway, and you are the only person who could potentially donate an organ. I'm looking at this sort of also like throwing this out there as we consider that we can't talk about abortion in a vacuum, right? Abortion has legal consequences in the world that we live in. So not only are you morally responsible, because I would agree, like I'm a mom, I have kids. I'm like, I think you'd be a pretty crappy parent if you're like, nah, I just don't want to get all those needles poked in me, let the kid die, right? That's terrible. Morally, should I be held criminally responsible for that? Because that's the world we live in here in Texas.
I think you should be held criminally responsible for any kid that you directly kill, unless you're at high risk of severe harm.
Okay.
I think that really applies if you have a 5-year-old kid who's running at you with a knife, and for some reason you have no other option other than lethal force of self-defense. You can only use lethal force of self-defense if there's a high enough risk of severe enough harm.
If you choose to have children, then knowing they're going to suffer, knowing they're going to need organ transplants that they're unlikely to be approved for, I think you could make a pretty good argument that you have chosen to make that child live and die a miserable life and suffer a miserable death. You made those choices that led to that. They would not have happened had you not made those choices. Should we hold people who have children in spite of knowing that they have genetic disorders that would cause these things, which is a very real scenario, should we hold them criminally responsible for those choices?
So can I re-ask your question in a way that's favorable to me, or is that too much? Okay.
So long as we could like examine why we would reframe it, for sure.
Sure. Okay. If you want, I'm just going to rephrase it and then we can go back to the way you asked it. But to me, it sounds like, would it be, which one is better to, like, less criminal offense, to allow your kid to suffer or be the direct cause of their death?
Wait, are you asking me allowing your child to suffer? So you're saying in this scenario, you are, by choosing to have this child,
I would say
by creating that suffering, are we still in that scenario where you have chosen this eyes wide open, or are we in a scenario where your child is suffering and you choose not to kill them? Like, can you specify for me?
My child is suffering. It seems like they're going to suffer for a week and then that's it, and they're going to die after that. I think it is less of an evil or less criminally bad. That's not the right phrase, but less criminally bad or less of an evil to let your kid live and go through the suffering and go through life instead of killing them before any of that happens.
I agree. That's a totally different scenario, though. Like, I agree with if they're going to suffer for a week and die, like, okay, but you're choosing to bring this life into the world, knowing it will suffer and knowing it will die prematurely, knowing that it's required to have this particular organ, and you're doing it anyway. And then we add to this question, what if you could save them with your organs? What if you have them, they have this genetic disorder, you refuse to give them the liver, so they're going to suffer and die. You made all the choices to bring them into this world. You did everything you would be doing in this abortion scenario, and then you're going to let them die because you don't want to give them your organ. So you created the suffering too, and you're choosing not to amend it. You're choosing to let them die here. Should that person be criminally liable? If you get a genetic test and you know your children will have this genetic disorder and you do it anyway, do we arrest you?
I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question the first time. I'm sorry about that. But yes, let me answer this question directly. So, no, I don't think you should be held criminally responsible for not for putting your child in a situation like that where maybe you could help by taking extraordinary measures by donating your kidney. But I don't think any parent should be criminally charged for not taking extraordinary measures to help their kid.
It's
Okay,
hard to feel then that or it's easy to believe then that you don't believe that pregnancy is an extraordinary measure.
I mean, yeah, I wouldn't say that's, I mean, it's extraordinary, but it's a part of every single kid. Like every kid has had to go through pregnancy.
Well, every kid's
Yeah.
parent has had to go through pregnancy. I think that that's something that maybe we have to point out, because the kids that we see that have gone through it that are alive are the ones who survived, right? And while that is a majority, because we live in a society that does have relatively advanced medical care, not every mom makes it through. Not every pregnancy goes to term. At this point, we are demonstrably arresting women who wanted the pregnancy and did have a medical procedure they had to have to continue living, maybe for their other kids. Like, I think that, yes, it's common. It does not mean it is not a major medical procedure.
It's common, and you know, I take Gohan's point that yes, every person living had some experience of pregnancy, you know, on the receiving end of that benefit. But as you point out, Sofia, that's a gigantic sampling error, and one that we really need to be reckoning with here.
So, like, I mean, I guess.
Sorry, go on.
Sorry, what did you say?
Sorry, Christy. I was seeing if Christy could expand on his point that,
Oh, really? I was just sort of
sampling error
highlighting something Sofia had said, which is that it's a gigantic sampling error to say that all people who are currently alive experienced pregnancy on like the receiving end, because as Sofia pointed out, all of the people who didn't get born were people who did not.
It's also kind of like let's compare it to another thing that's common, but also can be difficult. So this feels like a big jump to make, but at the same time, I'm going to do it because I think it illustrates the point. For YouTube gods, I will say CSA. Is that something you know what I'm talking about here, Gohan?
yes, ma'am.
Okay. So CSA is actually extremely common. 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys are going to experience some level of CSA before they reach the age of 18. So I think it's imperative that we do something about it. I think it's important that we talk about this very seriously. It would be very easy to say, and I have heard people say this with their own mouths, so these are real people, that talking about it only makes it worse, and that really, like, you know, everybody there's so many people who do survive it. It's sidestepping the question of those who commit suicide. I just might have upset the YouTube gods by saying that, but it's sidestepping the questions of the massive impacts it has on people's lives, because it's able to shrug and say, well, a lot of people survive. I would say that pregnancy and childbirth are very similar in that they're common. They're things a lot of people go through. And yet, this is sort of ignoring the fact that a lot of people don't make it, that it's one of the most dangerous things that one can participate in, even with the highest standards of medical care. And that pregnancy loss and loss of children within the first year of life is not only, you know, not that uncommon, but it's horrifying. It affects you forever. And so to just say, well, a lot of people do it, it really is minimizing how impactful and epic this really is.
So if I was going to respond to that, I would say, yes, pregnancy is a dangerous measure. But my question would be, how dangerous can it get before you're allowed to use lethal force? in self-defense. And
In Texas,
I mean,
the mom can die.
like, let's say,
Like, that's just,
Oh.
we live in
Well,
this
no,
state. That's the thing that happens.
really is where we've drawn a lot of these legal lines, and that really
Yeah.
does matter. Like, if we were to talk about sort of the ethics of when or how should abortion ever be appropriate, and whether it should be freely available to all women all the time, or whether it should be restricted to certain situations, perhaps involving rape or incest or genetic abnormality or danger to the mother, like, I think those could potentially be worthwhile conversations, but they have to be couched in an understanding of the world in which we live in. We can't just say some hypothetical ideal. We have to actually look at the way we value pregnancy in this country, at the access to medical care that we have available, at the societal resources that are or are not being offered to pregnant mothers and a lot of people who find themselves in high-risk pregnancy situations.
so if there is a high-risk pregnancy and it is like your life is on the line, then according to what I've said before, if there's a high risk of severe harm, you're allowed to use lethal self-defense.
I think that's
I
what's
just hope
written,
that
but that is not reality.
That's not the reality of
Well, I mean, I
many
can't-
pregnant people here in the state of Texas, and there are even more draconian laws across a lot of this nation. And I think that would be certainly the first thing that we would start with, is that we need to amend those laws. I think anytime we talk about abortion, we have to get away from a strictly binary ideal of exactly what anybody should do, and rather create a suite of options that can be appropriate to any number of very intricate situations. And as Sofia pointed out earlier, be very mindful about the way we differentiate morality and criminality.
Yeah, I think that I'm going to jump in also and connect this a little bit, because I think it's really easy to say when we're just thinking morally things that we would be okay with, or things that would operate within our system of morality and integrity, and not necessarily realize the impact that those things have. Say in general, we disagree with abortion. And so we do things like select policies that would make it illegal or harder to get, with these caveats maybe written into the law. That can feel really good. That can feel like it fits with our moral framework. But the law doesn't have our moral framework. We cannot write it specifically enough that we will agree with it in these moral ways in all circumstances. And so when we try to legislate kind of these feelings, this internal sense of integrity, we end up putting it at the end of a cudgel. The law is not a finely tuned instrument. The law is basically at best kind of an axe. So whether or not you morally believe that a high-risk pregnancy should be something that someone could consider having an abortion under, that's not really going to be reflected in the reality. That's an interesting moral argument, I guess, but it kind of doesn't really matter if that's still going to mean that we select things that make it harder for other people to get, or harder for other people to get abortions, because the upshot of that will be death on the part of the mother. We've seen that happen again and again. So it's kind of nice to live in a world where we're like, the thing I prefer to happen would happen. The way I would prefer for this law to be interpreted, it would be interpreted that way. We really can see now that that's not the case, though.
So I think I'm going to just respond to one thing Christy said and one thing you said, Sofia. But
For sure. We just threw a lot at you. So
Christy, I know you. We're good. Christy, I know you said like it shouldn't be such a black and white. Like there should be some room for exploration. But I think whenever it comes to discussing killing a human organism, we need it to be as black and white as possible. This is the line you can cross. This is the line you cannot. If you cross this line when you're talking about killing another human organism, you've crossed the line. And that line needs to be as defined as possible. And
yeah, I very much
so
appreciate that point of
to be
view.
there.
When we talk about these slippery slope type arguments, I do think that anytime the question is, where do we draw the line? The answer needs to come down fucking somewhere. And I think I would put forward, based on what Sofia just said, that a idealized society would be one that removes criminality from the conversation and that puts these very complicated moral questions into the hands of pregnant people and their medical providers. How does that reality strike you? Is that not where you might draw your line, Gohan?
And this is that was kind of leading into my question with Sofia, because it sounded, and correct me if I'm wrong, Sofia, but it sounded like you were okay with what I said, except you don't think it's going to be practiced as said, and therefore you don't think it should be law. But you're okay with the idea of it, that you shouldn't be able to kill another human organism unless there's high risk of severe harm, and that should be held consistent throughout every human organism.
No, I don't necessarily agree with it, but I just didn't choose to argue with it in that moment. I mean, I think that that's a totally,
okay. So
that is such a hypothetical that I also would bring it down to, like, I guess, if you're curious about my personal stance on it, I think that before a certain point, that point being viability outside of the womb, which I know is a squishy question, but that's where I personally would draw this line. I don't think there's such a thing as a moral, like abortion itself is not a moral question. There are moral abortions and immoral abortions. Chances are how you go about it would sort of matter. So, for instance, an immoral abortion may be one in which you are in every way wanted pregnancy going forward, having like a great situation, and then you choose to, abort the baby, which I conceptualize as a baby because I've had kids, but not everyone has to, in order to get back at your partner. That would be, I would say, an immoral abortion. It's not really about the abortion. It's about the motivation. It's about the fact you were doing this expressly to hurt people. So, I'm like, that's, I guess, would be an immoral abortion. But like a moral abortion could be one where you have 3 or 4 kids already. This is going to literally take food out of their mouths. You do not have the ability to support another child. You don't have the time to support that child. And you may want it, but it's just not going to be reasonable for you to take care of that. If that is really the best option for someone, I'd say that's a moral abortion. So I would say that there's not really like a line I draw on abortion itself beyond viability. And again, that's my personal line. I did a quite deep study on the concept of abortion for a while. And the place where I was the most surprised my opinion changed was actually in late-term abortions, because I thought I was going to be against those no matter what. The more I got into it, looking into when they actually happen, who actually gets them, and the circumstances that they go through, I was surprised by how much I felt like those should be allowed. I thought I would have a really hard line there. It turns out it's pretty much always a very thoughtful decision undertaken by doctors. Doctors oftentimes refuse to do late-term abortions because they're like, no, I'm not comfortable with this. This baby's viable. I'm not going to do it. It's usually in really horrific circumstances where that was an incredibly wanted baby anyway. And by usually, I mean every single time I can think of. It's just I'm leaving room for a possibility that that's not the case. So, I guess I've also been surprised by my own opinion on abortion as time goes. This has been a bit of a rant, but you mentioned what I believed. So there it is.
Well, I appreciate that. I think you're the first host I've talked to on the various shows who has given a line other than birth. And I understand it's not a hard line for you because you're still seem to be okay with late-term abortion in certain circumstances, but I appreciate the honesty. And I would say, first off, there's no such thing as an unwanted kid.
Isn't that true? Sorry, that's not true at all. What are you talking about? I know multiple people personally who were conceived through rape. I mean, that's just, how is that possible that that's a wanted kid?
That kid, somebody else would love that kid if they had the chance. I guarantee it.
Okay. I highly recommend you. Okay, I'm going to just pause right there. I'm sorry.
15 seconds in our foster care system, please.
Yeah, exactly. 15 seconds in our foster care system. Also, our adoption system has a lot of issues. Even if that kid is technically considered wanted by someone else, it doesn't mean that they deserve to use my body if I'm raped to have their own kid. First of all, that's a really horrifying thought. And second, look up stories of adult adoptees. Adult adoptees will talk about their experiences as the adopted child, and they're oftentimes horrific. They will actively say they wish their biological parent could have had an abortion. These are not necessarily solutions. That's kind of like saying there's no such thing as an unwanted street urchin in Dickensian England. Somebody will put them up a chute to have them, clean fire flues. Somebody will use that kid. Like that's really difficult. At some point, if we extrapolate far enough, someone wants to use you to fill a hole in their life, maybe even pretend that you're their biological mother. But that's not a solution. And I highly encourage you to even also look up the death rates for adopted children versus non-adopted children. These experiences are different. And I'm not by any means saying every adopted family is bad and evil, but there is inherent trauma in adoption, and it is made light of very easily. And I feel like we're kind of on the brink of that. So I really would be curious as to your thoughts if you kind of engage with those stories of adult survivors of adoption. And I use the word survivors because that's what a lot of them use.
So two things. I've read the Trolley study, and that was honestly like a good source, certain circumstances of, hey, this is how abortion improved my life, or hey, this is how abortion improved my family's like X, Y, Z. There's a lot of stories like that in the Trolley study. I'm not going to pretend like abortion hasn't helped out people financially, or helped out families financially. I definitely think it can, and it has. But I think there's a lot of evil in the world that can also help out families. But as far as
like cutting Medicare,
adult adoptees, I'm gonna have to wait a couple of years. I have 2 adopted kids myself, and we'll see what happens when they get older. But for right now, I'm just going to try to be the best parent to them that they deserve. So
I almost feel even more so. Yeah. So I actually love that. I almost feel like even more so than because you're a parent of adopted children, the kids who have struggled and had the inherent trauma of adoption and still do talk with and are close to their adopted parents, it's because their parents started researching the system. And a lot of them mention, like these adult adoptees talk about how, yeah, their parents adopted them and then started to research the system and kind of realized some of these outcomes, and it actually made their adopted parents better parents who had more of an understanding of where they came from. So I get that it might hit like a little closer home because for me, I'm like, the immediate thing I think whenever I learn anything about parenting, I'm like, oh no, did I completely mess up my kid already? Because I have a almost 1-year-old, and I'm like, right? They're so vulnerable. But I know it would be difficult, I'm sure, because I go through similar difficulty, but that might actually be really good for you to look into because you have adopted children, because there are parents who have done that, and it's been pretty good.
Correct. I know, like for me, when my kid turned 1, I was like, hey, we made it. The kid is still alive. We did something right. And then, but now that as she gets old, I might get a little emotional, but she has 2 older siblings that the mom kept. So I know she's going to have abandonment issues growing up because she's going to be like, well, why did she get rid of me? What's wrong with me? So I know that's going to be coming down the line. Or trying to keep an open relationship with the birth mom. Hopefully that takes away some of the abandonment issues. But you know what? Well, whatever she has coming down the line for her, we'll be there and we'll try to support her. But she's probably going to have some issues going down the line. But I think whatever issue she has, it's better than her being killed when she was in the womb.
I think that
and
I really appreciate. Sorry, go ahead.
About the parent.
I think that that's where these issues become so hard. And I think it can be easy to minimize the major impact that abortion can have. It's and just say like it's good all the time and I believe in it all the time. It's also easy to minimize the major impact that I appreciate that you've read the Turnaway study, that not having an abortion can have. I think I think one thing I do want to put out to you is that the way you love your kids, what you feel for them and about them, is so often the way that women who have abortions feel about their already living children. It's not easier. They don't love their kids less than you love your kids. And they're still making this choice, which to me indicates it's more than just financial. You know, I think we threw out kind of when you're like, yeah, there may be financial benefits, but there's financial benefits to evil things all the time. Okay, but let's talk about what the financial situation means for these particular families. You know, that might mean, particularly as it can be hard to ensure that your children are fed and clothed, and we have less and less support for that over time, that might mean that you have active suffering on the part of these children who are already alive, who love you so much. And I don't expect this to change your opinion at all necessarily, because I really appreciate how much you're engaging with this issue. But I think I put it out there to just underscore that, yeah, I agree that it's great and wonderful that you get to have children you love. I don't think anything, I in no way want to discount that, but these women who do have abortions also love their kids too.
Yeah, if I can just bottom line it all a little bit, I want to say that I really acknowledge Sofia's point about the possibility of a, quote, moral abortion versus an immoral abortion. And where I really come down ultimately on all of this is that we ought to be removing the criminality of it and leaving those very complex moral decisions in the hands of pregnant people and their medical providers, who I hope are being taught through a incredibly complex series of medical ethics and are working very diligently to apply them in incredibly specific and difficult situations, and that we would build a society that offers support to these decisions and to these different types of opportunities, and that we take lawmakers who are incredibly disconnected from the situation and so often just looking for good sound bites out of the equation. Sofia, does that feel like a place that you'd feel comfortable coming down? Is that a good bottom line for you as well?
Yeah, I think that sometimes it surprises people how much I may morally oppose certain situations for abortion. That's a personal choice on my part. Like, that's how I feel about it. But because these are so complex, because these issues are so hard, because we know what happens legally and we see it more and more every day, when we've taken the ability to make that choice out of the hands of doctors, out of the hands of the women who are most impacted by this, and put it in the hands of the state, that I feel like because of the complexity, then it needs to be something individuals and healthcare providers select, you know, not in spite of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so Gohan, can you kind of bottom line it for me and let me know where you're at here at the end of this call?
Yeah, I would say I brought up points for in favor of abortion for financial reasons. But I know a lot of the times it's more of how can I feed the rest of my family, or even for the kid itself. This kid is going to suffer. I love this kid so much. I don't want them to go through with the suffering. Let me end their suffering now. I understand that, but I also understand a lot of evil in the world has been done out of positive thoughts for good. I think there's a line in it from Pirates of the Caribbean. Do you guys remember that movie? It's
yeah, definitely remember that movie.
When she's not.
Sorry, I have a lot of stories about that movie.
No worries. A lot of good things are paid. It pretty much is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So doing evil things like killing your kid can be done from a point of love, but in the end, that act is still evil. So
here's something I would say. I fully agree. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. I fully agree with you.
Sorry, go on.
That I love quotes like that. I fully agree with you that a lot of good things can be done out of evil. I think that's exactly how I would describe our current abortion laws. There are things people who feel an immense amount of stress at the concept of abortion, who feel it's doing something evil. But as a result, we have created a situation where women and their doctors cannot make choices, and women are dying, or women are being permanently incapable of having children because they go through this really horrific process. Like, these are laws that I think may have been made with some very good intentions, probably out of love. And I mean, I think I love that. I love that line, but yeah, I would apply it to that too.
Yeah, I mean, when we get into the like deontology versus utilitarianism type situation and debate, we do have an obligation to descend into the particulars and actually see what is happening. And we can see very clearly in the statistics since the Dobbs decision that market harm is being caused, particularly to pregnant women. So it's definitely a concern. Gohan, I really appreciate your call and you being willing to descend into some of these hypotheticals.
Yeah, and it was a very nice call. Sorry, I got a little emotional there.
No, don't be sorry. I mean,
it's a place for big feelings.
Yeah, I feel like it means it matters to you. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, of course it matters. I mean, even if you have kids, the idea that like either half of humanity, not half, but like 1 million of humanity is being killed in America, or 1 million pregnant moms are being forced to go through something they don't want. It's a bit, either I'm right and I'm saving kids, or I'm wrong and I'm hurting millions of women. It's a big question. So I really got to try and make sure that I have as good of understanding of this as I can get. I think discussing it with people who disagree with me is probably the best way to go. Reading things like the Turnaway study. And one thing I was surprised with the Turnaway study was it said it actually showed data for how, I'm going to say pro-life laws. I know you're not going to agree with that, but how pro-life laws
it's the term we use, you know.
Yeah, but like how it actually does affect. Like one thing I keep hearing is that all these laws won't stop women from having abortions. It actually does. It has a very real effect, and I think the overturning of Roe magnified that even more.
Yeah, I think you're actually right about, you know, like I feel like we could go on talking for days. This is a very interesting conversation, but yeah, I really appreciate the.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time.
And it's been a very good time. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I do want to remind people that Bat Cruise tickets are still available, but rather than jumping into all of those different places that you can donate and support the organization, I just want to remind people again about bit.ly/Austin Flood Fund, where you can contribute to the 501c3 nonprofit Kerr County Flood Relief Fund that was set up by the Community Foundation of the Texas Hill Country. And before we jump into our next caller, let's go ahead and thank our incredible top 5 patrons. Sofia, you want to do the honors for us this week?
Yeah. Give me 1 second to, yes, there they are. I'm sorry. I was really absorbed in that call and I was like, I should scroll down. Okay, so our top 5 patrons. Number 1, Oops, all singularity. Woo. Number 2, Dingleberry Jackson. Number 3, Kalevi Helvetti. Number 4, J.A. Carlton. And number 5, Hell's Bells. It looks like there's some names in here.
Glad to see her on the list.
Oh, nice. Yeah, there's some names in here that I'm like, I'm less familiar with. So it's fun to see it shake up a little bit. Yeah, honorable mention to Davor Valjean, which I'm kind of saying like Jean Valjean from Les Mis. Like that's where I went with it. Has
to be the way that you do it.
Yeah.
3, 4, 6, 0, 1. Okay, it's probably gonna get us demonetized. Yeah. tiny.cc/Patreon-TH if you would like to join us as a Patreon subscriber. And with that, let's kind of keep the conversation going by talking to Anne in California, who has another view on abortion. Anne, what's on your mind?
Hello, Christy. Hello, Sophia. How are you today?
Hi.
Doing all right. Thank you.
Yeah, doing pretty well.
Good. Well, I'm calling in as someone, I have been pregnant 3 times in my life, and I made a different decision each time. So I know personal experience doesn't necessarily amount to expertise, but
I do think it
My
is
first
important to
pregnancy
enter into
was-
this space with. I mean, we talk to so many folks who I won't say don't have any dog in this fight, but who don't have a uterus, who have never had a, congenital condition or been faced with that like life of the mother, life of the fetus type of decision. So I do really appreciate the thoughts of somebody who has been in experiences related to pregnancy. So sorry for that preamble, but please go on, Ann.
Okay. Well, my first pregnancy was, I gave the baby up for adoption. I was impregnated non-consensually, and I didn't know what to do. I was 18 years old, just, a girl with 9 siblings from a Catholic family. And I didn't know what to do. I was scared. I'm like, well, I can't get an abortion. There's no way I could keep it because I was 18 and my parents said that if I kept it, I wouldn't be able to live in their house anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So they were going to throw me out and I had nowhere to go. I had no money. I had nothing. And so my final decision was, okay, I'll give the baby up for adoption. And I felt really good about that decision.
Sure.
So because I thought, you know what, it's the best thing for the baby. And, and I'm not going to lie, I was not ready for that role. I wanted to,
Sure.
have a few years of being young. So, but I still feel that it was the best decision at the time. God, there's so much. So I went through this Catholic adoption agency and, cause it was all I knew. Like I wasn't even sure I even believed in that stuff anymore, but I was like, well, you just stick with what you know. And I was raised very Catholic. So I'm like, okay, that Catholic adoption agency was the port in the storm for me that I went through. And, then the time came, I had the baby. I chose the parents before she was born. I had a meeting with them. They're very nice people, but I'm really nervous. Sorry.
Oh no,
No
but
worries.
hey, like just to affirm that I really appreciate you sharing your story even so far. Like even so far, there's perspectives in it that are great and that are so valuable. So, and I can tell you, I can't really speak for you, Christy, but I have a hunch you'll agree that we make the best decisions we can at that time. And so I absolutely can see how as an 18-year-old, you're like, what do I do here? This is a huge, huge decision. And, so just so you know, in case you were thinking, am I going to be judged for this? Zero amount of judgment from anywhere here. And I fully believe you were doing your best at every point.
Yeah. Me and Carl Rogers would co-sign. Please keep going.
Okay. Where was I? Okay. I chose the parents and everything. And I had the baby, but I was not prepared I thought there's going to be some emotion, but I was in the hospital for a couple of days with her and, I only got to hold her for a couple of minutes every evening, but every time I held her, I sobbed. It was so hard. It was just so hard.
No doubt.
And then the last day in the hospital when the adopted parents were on their way to pick her up, they asked me if I wanted to hold her one last time, and I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't do it. It was so hard. I was like, no, if I hold her one last time, I'm not going to want to let her go. And I've already made this decision, and and I knew if I had switched and said no, I'm going to keep it, I'd be screwed. So,
Sure.
The only thing I could do was I'll just leave the hospital without holding her one last time. And I don't feel like I was getting rid of her or abandoning her in any way, but I do feel sometimes that these pro-life people, when they talk about it, they kind of act as if it's always just, a mother, a woman, just, getting rid of a child. And they seem to have this casual attitude about adoption. Oh, just give it up for adoption. Well, as you were talking earlier, the adoption system is not great, and the foster care system is horrible.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess I'm saying, like, pro-life people really need to think about what it means. And I know there's all different kinds of cases where a child is taken from a parent. Sometimes they give it up for adoption. Sometimes maybe the child gets taken away from them
Mm-hmm.
for whatever reason. Sometimes, or they'll drop it off at a fire station or something, but they're all hard. And they're hard on the person doing the act, and they can be hard for the kids. And what Gohan was talking about earlier about, I guess, an adopted daughter or something, but he's saying, he knows that he's going to have to, help her when she starts asking questions about, why did my mom get rid of me? What did I do wrong? And I'm like, well, what, does he know the circumstances? Because I didn't get the whole story about it, because I was, chatting with the call screener. But my daughter's adoptive parents told her that, your mother, she was a young girl, and she was very scared, and she was very confused, and she wanted to do what was best for you, or what she felt was best for you. And so,
Mm-hmm.
She gave you to us. So.
Yeah, no, I very much
So
appreciate
it's
that
like there's
story. I'm interested in your other experiences with pregnancy and how that might kind of inform you in these questions of the criminality of abortion, or any other thoughts you might want to impart to us.
Before that, I also just want to acknowledge from a human perspective that I actually got a little emotional as you're talking about holding your baby and how, I've had to, and I remember being asked at the hospital, like, okay, so you're taking your baby home, like, just to clarify that there wasn't an adoption agreement in place, and just how strong you must have been, because even hearing about it, I'm like crumble inside. So I'm just acknowledging that and appreciating that you're sharing. Oh, I don't know if you see it, but they're sending you love rings on the screen. So how much I appreciate that, and how, we never know who needs our story. And so someone listening to that story, as hard as I'm sure it is to share a lot of the time, if it can just soften their heart toward others who are going through something similar, I just appreciate that so much.
Oh, thank you. I didn't mean to make you emotional. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Emotions are
These are
bad. It's
important
fine.
topics. Yeah.
Okay. So, Christy, you asked about my other experiences.
Yeah, or really just what your experiences have taught you about this question of abortion and the morality or the criminality of it all, and what you might recommend. What is your sort of ought for those watching about how we ought to be thinking about abortion?
Well, I mean, again, it's another personal experience, but, because I did eventually have my son with the father of the fetus that I had an abortion from. But I mean, my opinion about it is that Roe v. Wade should have been law, because I think Roe v. Wade, it's like up to viability unless there's something wrong. And if people want to be pro-life and they want to prevent women from getting abortions, well, what are they doing to help?
Yeah,
I mean,
I don't like to engage in
whataboutism,
whataboutism, but you're definitely highlighting a really important point
I
here,
know, sorry.
because if the pro-life movement wants to be invested in increasing the well-being and the number of people being born, then there are definitely some much more efficient and effective ways of going about that process. It does raise some very interesting questions about the motivation of the pro-life movement and its ties to evangelicalism. I mean, there's a lot to be said going down that road.
Right. Yes, there is. There's a lot to it. I mean, personally, I think that, I guess I'm on the safe, rare, and legal, thing where, like, I believe in proper sex education. I believe in freely available contraception, so people, they have information and they have protection, not just from, pregnancy, but from diseases too. But if that doesn't work out and say you do use failed birth control and you get pregnant and you don't want to keep it, then yeah, I think, within the first 20 or so weeks, what the Roe v. Wade was.
I mean, I definitely co-sign all of these wish list items, and just kind of want to add on to it, building a society where we actually respect the sexual and bodily autonomy of young women. I mean, basic feminist ideals here would really change the conversation.
Yeah, I think the thing that stands out to me as you're saying this is that we know how to eliminate abortion. It's the things you just listed. We know how to make it so rare that it is almost just completely negligible. It is sex education. It is free contraceptives. It is ensuring that we talk about things like consent. It's ensuring that we have a healthy respect for people's personal sexual and life choices. But we know that for religious reasons, there are people that are actually opposing these measures in our society. And I think for me, we are an atheist show, right? And so for me, kind of when I think about what Christy mentioned up top, Christian nationalism, it's hard to believe people really want to do things like eliminate abortion when they then support wholeheartedly people in power who are not going to do those things, who are just going to crack down on women. That's tough. That's hard to really believe it's the abortion they care about, Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It is. I mean, ever since Roe v. Wade was overturned and the Dobbs issue, look at the horrible things that happened. Like that poor woman in Georgia who had a blood clot in her brain and she couldn't get care and she was brain dead, and they kept her on life support because she was like 9 weeks pregnant when she died. Or was declared brain dead, and they kept her on life support until they couldn't keep her on life support anymore, and they had to remove, the fetus from the womb.
And I think the thing for me that comes up with that, Well, the thing for me that comes up with that is that you described it as horrible, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think the thing I have a hard time with people is those who don't see that as horrible. Those who see that as a good outcome. There are plenty of those, and it's usually for religious reasons. And it's hard not to see religion as harmful personally in society when it's literally making someone an incubator and calling that a win,
Yeah. I mean, that's what we've come to. And I think in any other timeline, if a pregnant woman died, the fetus would die too, and they would just, this is a tragic loss. They wouldn't assign any criminality to it or, suspect any foul play. It's just, a pregnant woman and the fetus have died.
Yeah.
It was just death back then. But now, I mean, even before Roe v. Wade.
Yeah. No, and I think the idea of keeping people alive in a brain dead state maybe wasn't as developed, but I agree. Like, so it kind of, knowing you're in California here, I've gone through 2 pregnancies and 2 births in Texas, which feels relevant here. And we had like a whole conversation with my husband and I, and this was, I realize what I'm about to do is admit to conspiring to potentially commit a crime in Texas, and I never committed, but it's essentially what I did. It was like, okay, if there's a situation where you may not survive, where something would happen, it was a discussion of what I would do, like what would happen. And I couldn't ask a doctor about it here because they could be held criminally liable for my abortion. There are many people that you know, the state of Texas has started requesting HIPAA records. Women in the state of Texas don't use period tracking apps anymore, oftentimes because they're worried that will be monitored to see whether or not they got an abortion at some point. So it's people act like this is crazy, but this is real. And so we're in a privileged enough position to say that my plan was to go to California to friends that I have there and seek an abortion if it became medically necessary. I couldn't talk to my doctors here. I would just have to come back and say that I went on a vacation in California and I had a miscarriage. That was our plan, because you have to have a plan. We were lucky enough to be able to have a plan, but exactly what happened in Georgia, exactly what has happened multiple times now is what we were worried about happening. It's so real. And for anyone to diminish that or the impact that would have on my husband, and with my second pregnancy, my current child, to say that I don't know, that abortion is not a potentially medically necessary procedure, it diminishes their lives. It diminishes the impact I have in their lives, that I might matter to my already existent son. It diminishes all of that. And it's bizarre that what I just did was admit on the internet to contemplating committing a crime, but that's what's real.
Yeah, it's a absolutely wild world that we are building right now, and the consequences of the Dobbs decision are still being sorted through, but early returns are really terrifying, whether we're looking at these anecdotal stories or the statistical analysis that are beginning to come out and be sort of sifted through. No matter how you slice it, when we bring criminality into this conversation, you see demonstrable harm, whether that was anybody's intention, whether that harm is being caused by a desire to prevent the evil of murder, or however we define that. Our current situation is incredibly messy, and I think that's something that we all have to grapple with, no matter where you come down on that question of viability, or whether or not to take care of the violinist or pull the trolley lever or whatever else you want to talk about. We have to recognize that there is incredible harm being done right now.
Yes. And even in California, I mean, I'm 57 years old and I've had a hysterectomy, but that doesn't mean that I don't feel like I have a dog in the fight, you know, because what I've been through, and because I don't want to see younger women, you know, deal with all of this and have to go through all of this. Like, I think about my daughter, I think about my granddaughter, but, like, I don't even, you know, like, even if I was younger and was, you know, still able to procreate here in California, I don't know that I would feel safe right now, even here.
I hear that.
Because the government has just gotten so out of control. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear that. And I feel like I maybe talk about this on air a little bit too often, but I have to admit I'm kind of fucked up about it. Just working as a therapist, seeing how many of my clients are fleeing the state of Texas because they don't feel comfortable raising their trans kid here because they don't feel comfortable risking getting pregnant and starting a family in a society that is not going to support them if something tragic were to happen. The amount of people fleeing the Austin area in order to seek some amount of, I guess, political refugee status in other states to try and feel like they have more safety and more support is just really remarkable. And it's something that I have experienced on a personal level with friends and family members leaving the area. It's something I've definitely seen in mass on a professional level. And it really terrifies me. This idea of let's just give the question back to the states is having profound impact on people's lives, even people who will never show up in the statistics on abortion-related deaths or whatever else we might be trying to use to gauge all of this.
Well, aren't there some states, is it Florida or one of them, they don't even put out statistics anymore? Or they fired the people who do the statistics? I thought I heard something about
I believe
that.
I caught a news story connected to Florida where there was reduced reporting. We're seeing reduced reporting across a number of federal and state agencies right now in a supposed attempt to cut back government costs. That's certainly another conversation, but a messy one, and one that I barely even want to think about in the wake of all of the criticism being lobbed on our weather forecasting system at this particular time in our state's history. So yeah, big questions to be exploring in that direction.
Yes.
I think it's also like one of those things that sometimes, I remember this happened during the pandemic as well, that I would bet money there's somebody listening who is just like, well, I mean, according to this stat, like that death was actually over this other thing, you know, and try to like split these hairs to say that it's not medical care someone was unable to receive during pregnancy that actually killed them, that it's not, you know, what we're saying that it is. Trying to split hairs with these stats or trying to paint them in a different way in order to argue that, you know, really the risks aren't as high as we're making it out to be. Women are just hysterical is really the upshot of that argument. Fundamentally, though,
I know that.
right?
Again, how many of these problems are
I've
solved by good old-fashioned feminism actually acted out in our legal system, in our culture, in our society?
Well, and it's interesting because I've had the argument with male members of my own family. One, that they are choosing policies where I could die. And that would be something they had chosen, that I was in that system. They chose to make a system where I was more likely to die than I was before. That's sort of hard to swallow when that's like people that you really love and care about, you know, not all of my male relatives, but a decent number. And they are making these for avowed religious reasons, but I guess my life matters less. Straight up, that just seems to be true because that's the decision that they're making. And that secondarily, we've talked about the fact that there is a death toll. No matter how we slice it, there's a death toll. How many women does it have to be before it's not okay with you anymore? Yeah. You know, like, is there a number? We're talking about black and white when it comes to human life. So what's that number of women? You know, how much can it increase that women die in childbirth, that women die from pregnancy-related complications before you feel like, okay, maybe this is enough. I'll change my mind. You know, there's no number. They're never going to be enough because it doesn't really matter to them.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah. That's what I was thinking. There's no
really
number for them.
Sorry, and I really just wanted to say that I heard what you said when a anecdote is not the same thing as data, that one person's personal story is not necessarily what we should be basing all of our, you know, governmental and moral thinking upon. And I'm incredibly grateful to you for being willing to share yours with us and to put a voice, if not a face, to some of these issues that so often get gobbled up by the internet into a bunch of men sitting around stroking their own beards, talking about what other people ought to be doing with their body. I really appreciate you joining us here.
Oh, I appreciate you having me on and letting me get this out, because I've been listening to several of these shows, and they bring up adoption. These pro-life people they bring up adoption like it's nothing, or they bring up that science fiction thing about, well, just take the fetus out and put it in an artificial womb, which that brings,
Sure.
which it's like, okay, one, that can't happen. That doesn't happen. It's probably not going to happen. But even if it could happen, then who is responsible for it?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I almost asked that exact question. I was like, who's paying for the artificial womb? Who's is it the states? Like, yeah. Anyway, I agree.
Yeah,
I almost
imagine the
asked that.
pro-life movement's willingness to pay for that question. Jeez. Yeah, so there's hypocrisy all around. We do have to still wrestle with these complex questions. There is no easy way to draw a strict moral line, but I think we are called upon to make moral judgments and hopefully not be judgmental of others when we don't know all the details of their situation. Anna, anything else you'd like to add?
Well, I just wanted to, Sophia discussed it, about the religion, these laws coming from religion, and we're not supposed to be that way in this country. It's the first thing in the Constitution, but we are, unfortunately, and religion in these abortion laws is causing women to be prosecuted for having miscarriages.
Yeah. These are very real issues, and points to what Sophia said about the law being a cudgel or an axe rather than a scalpel or a razor. And yeah, I do think that we can make good laws to try and prevent people from doing bad things. I think there is no person on earth who could reasonably say we have done that around the question of abortion. And certainly there are things that need to be revisited.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time. You have a great rest of your weekend. All right. Well, I want to make sure to bring Richard back in and check in here at the end of the show. As we're getting him pulled up, Sophia, I guess I wanted to ask you about, sort of that question hanging over our head about patriotism and Christianity and this whole show being about abortion seems really tied to that idea. I mean, how does Christian nationalism factor into our entire abortion system? You have 30 seconds, go.
Okay. I would say that I really love your definition of Christian nationalism up at the top of the show, where America belongs to white Christians and should be ruled accordingly. I thought that was a great definition, because I look at it and I'm like, I'm white, no longer a Christian. I would only add into that white Christian males, because my rights are not really thought about here. I would also point out that my undergrad is in political science. I know a lot about the Constitution. I've gotten into so many arguments with Christian nationalists where they say something is the Constitution and it's demonstrably not, because you know what I have in my purse at all times? A Constitution. I am a patriot. My family has been here since the fucking Mayflower. So, I guess you can't get more heritage American, which is basically just a white American anyway, than me. Yes, I'm almost translucent. I am so white. I have, as Dwight Schrute would say, genes so pure you could lick things off of them. And yet, fuck you still. I am of these people. I know these people. I was raised around these people. I've been in these churches. I believe these things. I made those arguments for you. You are still wrong. And not only are you wrong, you are cruel. And the cruelty is the point. Okay.
All right. You made good use of your 30 seconds. Goddamn. Thank you so much. Richard, what do you have to add about the notion of American Christian nationalism? Or really any of your thoughts about the show before we wrap up today?
I just want to know if Texas is really the Republic of Gilead, because that's what it sounds like to me.
It feels that way sometimes. But now with legalized THC, I guess. So
I know.
Okay.
So that we can be docile as they attempt to
our
inflict this upon
patchwork
us.
of laws. Federalism is kind of in doubt when you live under some of the people I live under right now. But fair enough.
Yeah. I think Gohan I think there was a little bit of goalpost moving going off to some of his responses. It was a good call overall.
I'd have to go back and listen to it again, but I did feel like the argument shifted every 10 minutes in that 40-minute call.
Yeah, I think it was a good call overall. One thing I'm really interested in with him, and he didn't give pronouns, so I don't know whether he's a him or what he claims to be.
Yeah, I imagine we're safest calling Gohan. I'm sure that's the way Gohan lives their entire life, and their pronoun-based decision was not at all political.
I'm interested because they've never raised it as to whether they are a Christian and to whether it is that Christianity that informs their beliefs on abortion. I'd be interested in that aspect of it. And Anne, great call. One of the great things I like about this show, especially when I'm, getting the opportunity to listen to the callers, is just listening to perspectives that I cannot possibly have myself and learning from them. And that was a fantastic, fantastic call with Anne. Great show. I really enjoyed it. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to make sure to remind people before we go out just one last time, bit.ly/Austin Flood Fund, where you can contribute to support people in Kerr County and the other affected areas here in Central Texas. Richard, can you remind us what the question of the week is?
I can when I pull the thing up. The prompt for this week is wrong answers only. Jesus blank for your sins. Reply in the comments and tune in at the beginning of next week's episode for the top 3 answers.
All right. Well, definitely we are sending out our love rings to all of the people affected by the flooding here in Central Texas, to everybody who's been affected by the Dobbs decision and are certainly inadequate adoption and foster care and medical health services for around pregnancy. Anybody else y'all are sending out love rings to?
I mean, I think you covered a lot of it. I'm thinking about Texas right now. Obviously, we're very close to it, and yeah, I think that's a good choice.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely love rings to the families of all those involved in that tragedy, and let's not give them prayers, but let's hope that they can take strength and support from those around them. And, let's have there's this thing about I've just read somewhere as the show was on about Texas didn't give aid to other states when tragedies happen to them, and they're appealing for aid now. And, the post I read stated that, well, we shouldn't be giving it, and because they didn't fuck that, give them the aid. And people need aid, and people need that support in this difficult time. It doesn't matter whether they're Christian, whether they're conservative, it doesn't matter. Sure. People are suffering. Do the right thing and give them all the aid you can, whether it's by donating, whether it's through the government channels, whatever. Let's help these people as much as we can.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's remember the humans in the humanitarian disaster.
Right? Yeah. The good ones and the bad ones and the blue, red, purple ones, the humans. Yeah. Not to tack this on, but I do want to send out quick love rings to Vegan Aliens and Miranda Rensberger, our Super Chat supporters. One note saying, I want to thank the host last week for the supportive words regarding veganism. My deconstruction led me to veganism, so I appreciate the support here, as well as great show. I can't believe it's already over. Well, I will say the same. I'll remind people that they can still donate and help those affected. And then, of course, remind everybody watching that if you don't believe, this is your community, and we appreciate you being here. If you do believe, we certainly don't hate you.
We're just not
convinced.
We want the truth. So watch Truth Wanted live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. Call 512-991-9242 or visit tiny.cc/call TW.